afternoon, my friends. This is Paul, and today's episode of ISTJ Observations is going to talk all about the wonderful world of introverted sensing, which is the dominant function for ISTJs and ISFJs, the secondary function for ESTJs and ESFJs, the tertiary function for INTPs and INFPs, and the inferior function for ENFPs and ENTPs. Generally speaking, a lot of people like to think that they have some degree of introverted sensing. However, most people don't even understand what introverted sensing is to begin with. I have heard it said that introverted sensing is the most mysterious and abstract function, especially for people that don't have it in their stack, aka the extroverted sensors of the world. So first off, why don't we look up the official definition of introverted sensing as is recorded on careerproject.org. According to this website, introverted sensing is all about associations, metaphors, and nostalgia. I know I've talked in the past about how introverted sensors hate metaphors, but it's the way that they're said that confuses them. So we'll get to that in another episode if you guys need clarification. Introverted sensing, abbreviated as SI by most people, can travel back to any point in time through a single scent or sound. Important information, and sometimes interesting trivia, is stored in filing cabinets where it can be retrieved at any later time. So let's break down what exactly does that mean. So for starters, it's all about connections. It's all about taking something in one time period and applying it to a past personal time period. So to use an example, let's say that an ISTJ or an ISFJ smelled or looked at a cake, and then 10 years later they see another cake. Instantly they can say, oh my gosh, I've been here before, and I can recall all of the various details surrounding this cake. Now, I have heard some of the extroverted sensors say that they use this to a certain degree. However, I think what they are referring to is simply using memory, which everyone has a memory. If you didn't have a memory, well, you would probably not be able to learn anything. You'd probably be in a mental institution because you wouldn't know how to lift your arms. You wouldn't know how to blink. Like, everyone uses memory to a certain degree. That's how we learn. Where introverted sensing differs is the filing cabinet definition on careerproject.org. Not only can introverted sensors remember a lot of stuff, but they organize it in their heads. They are able to put various details in place to keep that information in its correct place, instead of what the introverted intuitives do, where they try to make everything interconnected and try to spot patterns and abstract stuff. The introverted sensor will say, that's a chair. You sit on chairs. These are the various materials that I have seen on the chairs. This is what this particular chair smelled like. So they get into much more of the nitty-gritty details and sensory, well, I'd like to say sensory overload, but that sounds too autistic. Generally speaking, introverted sensors love to be overwhelmed with facts and information. To them, it's not boring or trivial to remember the color of a carpet or to remember what type of t-shirt someone was wearing at any given time. Generally speaking, most people with introverted sensing really like an eye for detail. If you notice my background here, it may seem like it's trying to be feng shui or trying to exhibit the certain rules of interior design. Nope! It's because all of these things that you see have some kind of past significance to me. You've got my grandparents, which were amazing people that taught me that I was loved. My hand is going in all different directions here on the webcam. You've got the Zelda and Loftwing amiibo, based on a Zelda game that I really love. Breath of the Wild, my favorite video game. Banjo and Kazooie, the best characters in Smash. I could go on, but everything that you see in my background is based on some kind of past love. something that brings me immense joy to relive. But again, any type is capable of doing that. I'm sure all of you, to a certain degree, have decorated your bedrooms with things that make you happy. If you're a Star Wars nerd, you probably got posters in the background. But an introverted sensor doesn't just do that as an interior design. They do it primarily in their minds. So for an introverted sensor, it is really easy for them to recall this information without necessarily seeing it again. They can just within seconds, possibly even less than that, can just suddenly recall a bit of information. Now, how does introverted sensing look like in the lower functions? So let's go over how each of the 4 categories go and how it manifests itself differently in each type. Now, admittedly, since a lot of you not a lot of you, since one of you requested that I should clarify my sources more, I was unable to find exact definitions of how each cognitive function manifests itself in each position, but I did learn about what each position means in general. And so I'm going to combine the information on Career Project with the information about the slots and sort of put it together to make it make a little bit more sense. So the dominant function is, of course, your subconscious. Like, you constantly use it even if you're not actively thinking about it. Like, an ESTJ just automatically wants to get things done. They automatically want to yell at everyone. Like, they don't even think about it half the time. So conversely, if you're an ISTJ or an ISFJ, you're constantly filing away all of this information. You're constantly thinking about the past and how to preserve that past. However, when a function is in the dominant, its opposite judging or perceiving function will be, in a sense, sort of at war with each other, where they're constantly like wanting to express the other, but the dominant sort of overshouts it. So, for example, for me, I might say, every single day I like to eat a bowl of Cheerios. Maybe it would be okay if we have cornflakes. No! We have to have Cheerios! Shut up! And it sounds really extreme, but every type has that kind of dynamic, just with different functions. So a healthy ISTJ or ISFJ will learn that not every single thing has to be rooted in past familiarity. Like, when I was young, I used to panic if someone would sit in my chair. Nowadays, I realize it's just a chair, like, get over it. Now, when it's in the secondary function, it's slightly harder for me to explain, because the way ESTJs and ESFJs use it is they use it to bolster the ideas that they're trying to represent. So usually those two types are very pushy and forward about making sure that whatever it is they need to judge on is happening. So ESTJs tend to be really bossy about workplace stuff. ESFJs tend to be really bossy about making sure everyone is happy, to like this very extreme, overwhelming degree. But how are they going to know how to keep that up? They're going to use their introverted sensing to get to that point. So how that differs from the ISTJ and ISFJ is that type is going to go there first, and then after they've sorted it out, then they're going to enforce, but to a much less extreme, more of just like a, well, duh, of course this is obvious. In the case of the ISTJs, or in the case of the ISFJs, I looked into all of the various ways that I can help you, so I am ready to be of service. Now, when it's in the tertiary function, this is where things get really weird. INTPs and INFPs, they're the types that are usually very caught in their own heads, very imaginative, in a certain sense bubbly, lost to reality types. However, their introverted sensing can sometimes help them to bolster these ideas or values that they strongly love. So for an INFP, obviously their introverted feeling is making them have these very strong convictions about what to believe and like what things mean to them on an emotional level. Their introverted sensing can say, oh yeah, that that sounds familiar. They're not going to over rely on it, of course. They're going to want to be more explorative and free. But every now and then, if they develop their tertiary function, they can recall instances that triggered that high emotional moment, or maybe their past experience gave them the opportunity to get to that point. So I admit that one was slightly more on the personal experience observation style, but again, according to the Myers-Briggs Foundation, the tertiary function is the function that needs a conscious effort to do better. Like for the ISTJs, for example, their tertiary function introverted feeling is they have this strong moral compass, but because it's in the tertiary, they don't often want to rely on it, or they might not be very good at expressing how they're feeling. So in the same way with the INFPs and the INTPs, they're so excited about exploring these new possibilities that they need to actually stop every now and then and say, oh yeah, familiar stuff happened. So instead of constantly thinking about the future, maybe I can try to involve my memory a little bit, try to organize these past occurrences. Now on to the inferiors, which are the ENFPs and the ENTPs. These types hate being compartmentalized. If introverted sensing is all about filing cabinets, then ENFPs and ENTPs are knocking down the filing cabinets and saying, oh my gosh, stop limiting me. I want to have so much potential to explore and experiment and see the whole wide world of new ideas. And their introverted sensing is telling them, now wait a minute, you do realize that there are certain rules and regulations. Screw you! I want to do my own thing. So see how just as the ISTJ fought against having the cornflakes, it would be the other way around for them, where they'd say, you know what, maybe I should stick to one cereal. No! I want to explore! I want to constantly... I'm using the wrong hands for this, but you get the idea. They are going to want to constantly explore and expand upon these new ideas. And if their introverted sensing tries to tell them maybe it's okay to stick to a routine, they're going to get tired and exhausted, which is why they are true perceiving types as opposed to the INFPs and INTPs, because they legitimately want that freedom to take in, to process. Narrowing it down to a strict, rigid schedule is going to make them exhausted. So yet another reason for why the four-letter system exists. So if you're feeling a bit left out, if you have extroverted sensing, which conversely means you also have introverted intuition in your function stack, you might be wondering, well, wait a minute, Paul, I can relate to some of the stuff that you're saying. I also can remember things pretty well. Well, again, introverted sensing does not automatically mean that you have a good memory. It doesn't automatically mean that you have a photographic memory. What it means is that you organize your past experiences. Generally speaking, when an introverted sensor is telling a story, usually more so in the top two, but the inferior and the tertiaries do this a little bit too, is they'll use their past experience as a way of making a point. They might say, here's an example. That's a very common thing you'll hear when those types are telling a story, especially me. I will say, let me tell you about the time that this happened, and that'll help me explain my point. The extroverted sensors don't do that as much. They don't over-rely on examples. They like to rely on explaining their internal framework. Again, very hard for me to explain because I don't use those functions, but generally speaking, my personal experience has led me to the conclusion that the extroverted sensors simply like to explain things without bringing in their personal experience too much. Not to say that they won't, but they're not going to constantly use it for as many opportunities as they can get. People with introverted sensing, they relish on the past so much that if you take me as an example, I actually get sad if I forget a detail. about my mission trips. I even want to know the unpleasant details. I want to know about all of the times that I sweated. I want to know about every single footstep I took. I want to know about exactly how long I was in the shower and what I dreamed about, but I can't because filing cabinets, just like in real life, only have so much storage space, and the human brain only has so much capacity for remembering things. The extroverted sensors are probably going to say, oh my gosh, Paul, that's so exhausting. I really don't care about all those little details. I just want to know, was it fun? Was it informative? In the case of the inferiors and the tertiaries, they might say, how can my sensory data help me to project this pattern into the future? So, if you're an extroverted sensor struggling to understand how to talk to an introverted sensor, I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is that introverted sensors are very reliant on their own experiences, their own observations of what the sensory world offered. So, if you really know them, it really helps if you draw on their past as a way of explaining things. So rather than bringing up stories of your own, which most of you don't do anyway, most extroverted sensors I encounter, they only talk about their past when I ask them to. But for most of you, if you really know the introverted sensor and indulge in all of their reminiscings and say, okay, I'll hear you talk about the bigger fish for the 10,000th time, you can use that to help them understand. Because introverted sensors often have a hard time looking outside of their own observations. So you can say, wait a minute, Paul, the point I'm trying to make here can be easily compared to that time that you were sleeping with all those guys in the gym, and therefore, now, I don't actually have a legitimate example right now, but generally speaking, if you can present your ideas in a way that presents a familiar dynamic, then they're more likely to understand you. If you try to overcomplicate things and explain things with your own reasoning and trying to over-rationalize your thoughts, take my ex-girlfriend, when she tries to explain herself, she tries to describe the literal state of her brain, like saying that things feel like a brick wall to her. And I'll say, huh? My brain doesn't feel like a brick wall. What are you getting at? But if she says, Paul, I feel like the pain that I'm experiencing right now is similar to the pain I felt when you dragged me into the burrs at your birthday party, I'll say, oh, whoops, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause you pain like that. That's the kind of explanation that I would prefer over this internal... I'm getting a headache just thinking about it. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is there is no such thing as a bad or good function. There is no such thing as a good or a bad type. Every single person and every single cognitive function has strengths and weaknesses. If you over-rely on introverted sensing too much, you can get into the pattern of never, ever, ever wanting to escape from that precious past. You'll never, ever, ever want to try out the slightest new things. You'll just constantly get yourself in a rut of the familiar, and you'll be one of those stubborn, cranky old men or women that says, this is how it always was in my day, this is the way it's always got to be, I will never get into those newfangled technology devices. But if you don't use it enough, then you can get into the habit of always wanting to experiment and never ever being satisfied with the same old things. If you don't have introverted sensing at all, then, well, obviously to a certain degree you can't help it, but you might not ever have an amount of respect for people like museum curators who try to preserve the past and to try to say, we got here because this is what our ancestors did. You might not be able to appreciate the amount of luxuries that you have because you might not have thought about it. You might have just been too busy thinking about the future that you haven't thought about the past. So, I hope I was able to make sense with all this. I didn't even get into why introverted sensing is so confusing to some types. I think to summarize in one little sentence, it's because people that don't use introverted sensing tend to be more in the moment. So to them, they're not constantly comparing everything. So let me know if I didn't explain myself enough in the comments. Let me know what your thoughts are on introverted sensing. How does it manifest in you? If you're an extroverted sensor, how am I being so mysterious to you? Let me know all of that and more down in the comment section. And until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye!